Parker Schnabel recently made a killing after losing over $15 million. He mined more gold than he had ever seen before. The past of rush racing. All right, let's get started. Even before setting foot on Dominion Creek, Parker Schnabel was enjoying the fruits of his most productive mining season to date. More than 8,000 ounces of gold had been extracted from the earth by his group. Everything that was worth about $140 million back then. It was all native to the well-known Scribner Creek area. That was more than just an astounding figure. Running a tight crew with minimal waste and maximum efficiency, Parker demonstrated once again that he was one of the game's sharpest operators. There was a noticeable improvement throughout that season. Sluffer and Big Red, the wash plants, hardly had a chance to cool off in between runs. More and more gold began piling up week after week. Parker, however, is not a miner who finds ease in his work. Even though the club was on a great run, he recognized that their current success would be short-lived. After years of mining, Scribner's easy gold was exposed, making it harder, thinner, and slower to reach. He needed fresh, large, proven ground that could produce at the same level or higher if he wanted to remain ahead and keep the gold pouring in the expanding enterprise. The 7,500-acre Dominion Creek is located 10 miles northeast of Parker's previous claims. This enormous plot of land was formerly a gold rig. Dominion Creek became a part of the discussion at that point. It is thought that this enormous tract of land still contains more than $160 million worth of plow gold. The purchase price was high, even though the figure seemed good. A chilly $15 million was the asking price. Quite the investment, even considering Parker's past performance. Nevertheless, the risk seemed essential as Scribner approached its final run and time was running out for Parker's operation to remain sharp. If the payoff materialized, it could dictate the remainder of his mining career. The pressure was mounting following a stellar season. Could Parker maintain his current rate of success and find even more gold? Maybe this new claim was going to be a $15 million blunder. It was never about growth for Parker when they bought Dominion Creek. This enormous gamble might have either set him up for success or doomed him to failure. The land was worth $15 million despite its history of yielding millions in gold. Someone whose eyesight Parker had developed over the years would be enough to frighten away most miners. Just a little dirt patch wasn't enough for him. It was a chance for long-term survival in a field where even the hardest crews would eventually give up. Parker had to look ahead as Scribner Creek's greatest pay was already taken. You will succeed if you concentrate your mind. Sure, I can get it done. Much obliged. Well done. As a result, he understood he wasn't merely purchasing claim when he committed to Dominion. He was venturing into uncharted territory where defeat awaited with a vengeance in the absence of gold. Even with all its potential, Dominion Creek proved to be a logistical headache from the very beginning, and reality began to bite as soon as the deal was finalized. Very different from Scribner's usual, recognizable churn. Now Parker had to deal with unfathomably difficult terrain, an abundance of mud, and a design that necessitated brand new roads, new wash plant configurations, and longer holes that devoured gasoline and patience like nothing he had ever encountered. In spite of this, Parker's already slim advantage shrank by thousands with each passing hour due to breakdowns or confusion. He fearlessly tried to claw back time and money by pushing harder even when they started slowing and demanding a 20% increase to the feed rate in rocks. Even though the claim appeared hell-bent on fighting them at every turn, Alex went along with it without a word of protest since everyone knew that more dope meant more gold and more gold meant a chance of making this bet worthwhile. However, an unforeseen event transpired afterwards. It was not, however, the sole failure. A broken conveyor belt was the problem one week. The next it was a jam feed or a pump giving out. Hours were lost with every malfunction. Time is money in the gold mining industry and the crew was feeling the burden. 2. I was completely unprepared for the longer hours, more effort, and increased stress that came with working on unfamiliar ground. The burden of everything. Despite some familiarity with Parker from previous work, many of the crew members were fresh to the operation and unprepared for the challenge that this claim would present. At every turn, it seemed like everything was working against them. Everything from the stubborn ground to the never-ending muck and broken machinery. Parker, however, was burdened by the crushing disappointment of a $15 million investment that remained unpaid as the crew concentrated on merely surviving each day. The horror intensified as a goal seemed elusive. Dominion Creek had a reputation for high salaries and consistent performance, but the reality was much more harsh. Regardless of its past, gold doesn't necessarily materialize at crucial junctures. And Parker encountered a string of painful letdowns throughout those initial weeks. Despite promising results, the test cuts used up all the gasoline, wasted a lot of time, and produced piles of dirt that weren't worth much more than the expense to move it. The greater elevation of Dominion Creek converted all roads into thick mud as the heavens opened up and the heavy rains struck. This proved morale draining as full trucks and ruined equipment were absorbed by the mud. As a result of the merciless weather, the crew was strained to their breaking point. Even though millions had already been invested, Parker was left with nothing but a nightmare that was quickly turning into a financial catastrophe. However, an unforeseen event transpired afterwards. From mud to gilded. When the pressure-crushing Parker crew discovered a new cut under the sofas, things started to change after weeks of broken equipment, frazzled tempers, and disappointment in the Acelia's box. It had used an excessive amount of time and fuel to reach this location, but it held the glimmer of hope that remained. When uncertainty about its viability reached the wash plant, a transformation occurred, and the water passing through the SLS boat took on a new hue. Genuine, thick, eye-catching, and tactile gold, not mere flecks. They hadn't seen a solid color like it all season until now. They have been pursuing this type of wealthy, compensated dirt from the beginning. And they did not retreat. Rather, they locked in. The plant was meticulously adjusted at every angle, and the layer was fed repeatedly until the gold seemed to be dripping out of a deep, unexplored vein that had never been crossed. They deserved it after going through so much obsession and weariness. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Parker allowed a small smile to appear on his face, as if he had sensed, deep down, that they may have discovered a zone that could save them from the brink. While Parker was in his Dominion Creek residence, Chris Juma proposed weighing the haul for the week. First, he tends to Slaughter, his own plant. For the past 30 days, this plant has been continuously drawing 145.0 from Australia Creek. This time, it brought in 270.050, which is valued more than $540,000. Shortly thereafter, Parker's turn came. Despite the fact that, prior to Roxanne's takeover, Big Red was his most lucrative producer. And his team still managed to bring in an incredible $453.80 or nearly $120,000 in a single day, even though they were down for repays. Their total for the week was $723.850. They hadn't seen a hole of that size all season. An incredible hoard of gold, valued at over $1.4 million. Every face on the claim was worn down by tiredness, but for a brief time there was a hint of relief, a tenuous feeling of contentment. The pressure persisted like smoke even while the gold was being transferred into containers. They were already far into the season behind schedule, and the calendar still remembered every delay they had experienced. It was true that Dominion Creek had now begun to deliver. After all they had gone through, the breakdowns, the fuel waste, the quiet fear that grew with each passing week, no one could say if this lucky break had arrived too late to make a difference. Parkin was well aware that just breaking even would be an uphill battle, let alone matching or exceeding last year's total, which would necessitate more than simply perseverance. It would necessitate relentlessly testing the boundaries of both themselves and the technology. In order to extract any remaining gold from the black date, they continued working nonstop, feeding the plant more and more and pushing it harder. Because the clock was constantly ticking louder, regardless of how much they were winning at the moment. They continued to plow forward week after week despite damaged components, bad weather, sore backs, and irritated personalities. The harm from earlier in the season still followed them, invisible but weighty, even if they had finally reached fertile ground. At this point, every drop counted. The outcome could change with each run. The sum they had been anticipating eventually materialized when the gold was poured and weighed, 566. It was down from last season's run by a few thousand ounces. It appeared to be a setback when viewed on paper. Less gold means less currency. There is a twist, though. All of it sprang from virgin soil. That was the winning factor. With the help of Big Red's enormous last haul, Parker was able to surpass his initial season's objective ahead of schedule. This is not, however, Parker's first turnaround. Parker receives a windfall. Parker and his crew had discovered what seemed like a hidden paradise at another mining operation. Long since the last person had set foot in an abandoned mine. As if the very passage of time had disregarded this location, decaying timbers and heavy layers of dust concealed rich veins of gold. Whoever had labored had apparently sprinted away, abandoning not only the tools and equipment but also the unprocessed riches that gleamed in the darkness and beckoned to be plucked. They didn't dally. Instead, they attacked the ground with a sense of urgency, unearthing gold at an unbelievable rate. However, something shifted as they continued to dig. Silent warnings began to encircle them in the form of strange symbols etched into the rock, corrosion that was clearly not intended for mine, and frigid air that never warmed up. And Parker, fixated on the precious metal, dug farther into an ill-planned discovery. Then they stumbled upon it, a game changer. It appeared like the ultimate gold mine when you first laid eyes on the mine. The granite walls were adorned with thick veins of gold that gleamed in the faint light. No evidence of mercury poisoning or antiquated mining equipment was found. Only unprocessed, unrefined gold lay there, ready to be extracted. Parker confidently claimed every last piece. The price of gold, though, is constant. They didn't merely find treasure when they dug. Danger lurked around every corner of the enigma. Parker recalled a tale his grandpa had told him about it. His grandpa once experienced an astounding 42-hour gold hallucination. After 4 hours, nevertheless, changed. As the excitement subsided, an eerie and lowly sound emerged from somewhere in the planet, a noise that neither humans nor machines could have produced. Just as the mine, which had been silent for years, began to stir. This time, there weren't any pricey drills or elaborate setups. There is no screaming motors and no freezing ground. With each shovel, a subtle but steady anxiety built among Parker's workers as they softly crumbled earth beneath their boots. They were hoping for another stroke of luck, like speedy digging yielding quick results. 100 grams of gold was extracted in a matter of hours, and each piece sparkled like stolen time. At first, it seemed to be true. Still, it was all wrong. As they continued to dig, it became increasingly evident that someone had previously dug here. Whatever it was, it had been sufficient to prompt them to swiftly go without packing, without prior notice, and without ever returning. Unfortunately, not everyone was in Parker's fortunate position. There was another miner in the region who had been trying to reach the bedrock for what seemed like an eternity. Even though it was sucking in cash at a faster rate than it was returning gold, he had invested all of his resources into that one hole. It was a high-stakes gamble, the kind that Parker was familiar with from his close observation, as he knew how quickly fortunes might turn from riches to ruin. And now, for the exciting part. It wasn't until Parker's crew arrived to clear the area that they discovered it wasn't a typical abandoned mine. An artifact from the past, preserved in a time capsule. Modern geological maps did not fit the rock formations. Something else, far more precious than gold, had been left behind, and the tools they discovered were too sophisticated for the era. Men wasted millions of dollars further downstream, treating the mining of gold from the riverbanks as a piece of cake. However, with each scoop came the possibility of good fortune or a sobering reminder of how rapidly things could turn bad. Parker was no stranger to dangerous situations, but the vibe in this mine was off the charts. The ground reeked of the failures of miners long before. Parker, nevertheless, felt compelled to go against the advice of others, for the simple reason that he and his colleagues saw this as the perfect gold mine they had been seeking. They could only do what was best for themselves while they uncovered the truth, and since they couldn't fathom why someone would flee such a wealthy location so quickly, it meant mining the most. Finally, with over $5 million in the bank, Parker stunned everyone by taking home over 2,500 ounces.